Before we get into this story, if you're new here, hit that subscribe button and ring the bell, because we share stories every week that remind you why kindness always wins. Now, let's talk about what happened on Family Feud that left an entire studio absolutely speechless. There was a time when a husband's job was to lift his wife up, not tear her down. But what one man did on national television, right there on the Family Feud stage in front of Steve Harvey and a studio full of people, was something nobody saw coming. He was supposed to be her teammate. Instead, he chose that moment on live TV to embarrass her, to make her look small, to laugh at her in front of everyone. What he didn't count on was Steve Harvey, because Steve didn't just stand there. He didn't move on to the next question. He stopped everything. And what he did next was so powerful, so unexpected, that the clip spread across the internet in hours. Millions of people watched it. They cried. They cheered. They shared it with every woman in their life who had ever been made to feel less than she was worth. This is that story, and trust me, you need to hear every single part of it. Building deep emotional connection. Who is Linda? Linda Pierce was 54 years old. She had spent the last 27 years of her life doing what millions of women do quietly and without recognition, holding a family together. She woke up at 5 in the morning every day. Not because she had to, because that was just who she was. While everyone else was still sleeping, she was packing lunches, checking homework folders left on the counter the night before, and making sure the bills were paid on time. She worked part-time as a school librarian in Columbus, Ohio, a job that paid just enough to help cover the family's expenses, but that she genuinely loved because she believed in the power of education. Her mother had raised her that way. "Linda," her mother used to say, "a woman who holds her family together is the strongest person in any room. Don't ever let anyone make you forget that." Linda never forgot, even when her husband, Gary, made it hard to remember. Gary Pierce was not a bad man in the dramatic sense of the word. He wasn't dangerous. He wasn't cruel behind closed doors, but he had a deeply ingrained, thoughtless habit of making Linda the punchline. At dinner parties, he would joke about her forgetting things. At family gatherings, he'd roll his eyes when she spoke up. He called it teasing. He called it his sense of humor. Linda had learned over the years to smile through it, to laugh along, to shrink herself just enough to keep the peace. Their daughter, Melissa, had noticed. Melissa was 28 now, sharp and protective of her mother in the way that daughters become when they've watched their mother be diminished one too many times. It was Melissa who had submitted the application for Family Feud. She'd done it as a surprise, filling out the form one Sunday afternoon while Linda was at church, because she wanted her mother to have a moment in the spotlight, a moment that was entirely hers. When the letter arrived saying the Pierce family had been selected, Linda cried, happy tears, the kind that come when something unexpected and wonderful lands in your ordinary life. She called her sister. She called her mother. She told everyone at the library. For the first time in years, something was happening that was just for her. She didn't know that Gary had already decided he was going to be the star of the show. Tension escalation, the moment that changed everything. The Pierce family arrived at the Family Feud studios on a bright Wednesday morning. Linda wore a pale blue blouse she'd bought specifically for the occasion. She'd had her hair done the week before. Melissa stood beside her, squeezing her hand as they walked through the entrance. Gary walked ahead of them. That detail, small as it sounds, told you everything you needed to know about their dynamic. The show's warm-up comedian got the studio audience energized. Lights blazed, music pumped. Steve Harvey walked out to thunderous applause, working the room the way only he can, his timing perfect, his presence enormous. The Pierce family was competing against the Henderson family from Atlanta, a lively, loud, wonderfully enthusiastic group who immediately won the audience over. Linda was nervous. Genuinely, visibly nervous in the way good people get nervous when they're not used to being on camera. Her hands were clasped in front of her. She smiled too wide and too often, the way you do when you're trying to project calm you don't actually feel. Gary, on the other hand, was relaxed, overly relaxed. He kept making comments to the people around him, joking with the crew, performing. The game began. The Pierce family was competitive. Linda's brother David had a quick mind, and they scored well in the early rounds. The energy was good. Linda even buzzed in on one question and got the number 2 answer, which made the audience cheer and made Melissa grab her arm with excitement. For a few minutes, Linda Pierce felt like herself, the full, complete version of herself that she didn't always get to be. Then came the moment. Steve Harvey turned to the family for a face-off question and gestured toward Linda. "All right, come on up here," he said, giving her that wide, warm Harvey smile. Linda stepped forward, smoothed her blouse, took her place at the podium. And Gary, standing just behind her and to the left, leaned slightly toward the family and said it, loud enough that the microphones caught it, loud enough that the people in the front rows heard it, with a grin on his face like he'd just told the funniest joke at a dinner party. "Good luck," he said. "She's gonna need it. She can't even remember where she puts her keys." Laughter, a little, nervous laughter from some of the family. A couple of audience members who caught it and weren't sure how to react. Linda heard it. You could see it in her face, that specific kind of stillness that comes over a person when they've been hit in a way they're practiced at absorbing. She didn't turn around, she didn't respond, she just steadied herself, hands on the podium, eyes forward. The way a woman does when she's had years of practice at not letting it show. But Steve Harvey had heard it too. He had the microphone, he had the show. And he had eyes that had seen every kind of human moment in his decades of standing on that stage. He looked at Gary. He looked at Linda, and something shifted in his expression, something quiet and certain and completely deliberate. Part 3. The weight of the room. Steve didn't address it immediately. He ran the question. Linda answered, correctly as it turned out, getting the number one answer with a calm focus that earned a genuine burst of applause from the audience. Melissa pumped her fist. The family celebrated, but Gary's comment was sitting in the room like something that hadn't been cleaned up yet. The audience could feel it. The crew could feel it. The kind of uncomfortable residue that lingers when something unkind has been said and nobody has decided what to do about it. Steve Harvey decided. As the family regrouped for the next segment and the audience settled, Steve turned, casually, conversationally, with no drama in his voice at all, and looked directly at Gary. "Can I ask you something?" Steve said. Gary smiled, clearly expecting a joke exchange, a little back and forth, some TV banter. "Sure," he said. "How long you been married?" Steve asked. 27 years, Gary said, with the pride of a man who thinks longevity alone is an accomplishment. Steve nodded slowly. 27 years. He let that sit for a moment. "And in 27 years, has she ever once let you down? Your family, your kids?" Gary blinked. The smile stayed, but it was working harder now. "No," he said. "No, she takes care of everything." "She takes care of everything," Steve repeated. He wasn't mocking Gary. He wasn't raising his voice. He was just reflecting the words back, slowly, deliberately, letting the audience hear them. "So this woman," Steve gestured toward Linda, "has been taking care of everything for 27 years, and she got the number one answer, and your contribution was a joke about her keys." The audience went completely still. Gary opened his mouth, closed it. The smile was gone. Justice delivered. Steve Harvey's moment. Steve Harvey turned away from Gary and turned fully toward Linda. And what he did next was the thing that broke the internet. He didn't offer her sympathy. He didn't speak to her the way you speak to someone who's been wronged and needs comforting. He spoke to her the way you speak to someone who deserves to be seen. "Linda," he said, his voice warm and completely sincere, "I want you to hear something, and I want you to really hear it. Not just today, but every day you walk out of this building and go back to your life." The studio was silent. Even the crew had stopped moving. "You walked up to that podium nervous. I could see it. And you know what you did? You got the number one answer. You did that under pressure in front of all these people with a camera in your face. That's not luck. That's a woman who handles things." Linda's eyes had filled with tears. She pressed her lips together, trying to hold it together. Steve kept going. "Women like you, I know this woman. My mother was this woman. She gets up every morning and she handles it. She doesn't get a parade. She doesn't get a trophy. She just handles it because that's what she does. And the least, the absolute least, that the people around her can do is recognize that. Not just when it's convenient, every single day." He looked briefly toward Gary, not with anger, but with the kind of measured, certain look of a man making a point he wants to stick. 27 years of handling it. That's not someone who needs a joke at her expense. That's someone who deserves a standing ovation. He started clapping. The audience rose, not politely. Not because it was a TV show and someone cued them. They rose because they meant it, a rolling, thunderous, genuine standing ovation that filled that studio from floor to ceiling. Melissa was crying. Linda's brother David was crying. Even some of the Henderson family across the stage were wiping their eyes. Linda Pierce stood at that podium and let herself be seen, fully, for the first time in a very long time. Gary stood behind her and said nothing. His hands were at his sides, and to his credit, and this matters, he wasn't defensive in that moment. He looked like a man who had just understood something he should have understood a long time ago. When the applause finally settled, Steve looked at him. "You've got a remarkable woman," he said simply. "Act like it." 3 words. The audience erupted again. Impact, resolution, and what came after the Pierce family didn't win the game that day. The Henderson family was simply too sharp in the final rounds, and they took home the prize with a celebration that was warmly deserved. But nobody in that studio was thinking about the scoreboard. As the taping wrapped and families gathered their belongings, Steve Harvey did something that production would later confirm was entirely unscripted. He walked over to Linda, away from the cameras, off to the side of the stage, and spoke to her quietly for several minutes. Nobody heard what he said, but Melissa, who was standing nearby, later described it simply. He treated her like she mattered. He just talked to her like she was someone important, and she is. She always has been. But she needed to hear it from someone other than me. When the episode aired 6 weeks later, it was the clip of Steve's speech that took off. Not the gameplay, not the scores. That moment, act like it, hit the internet and didn't stop moving. Within 48 hours, it had been viewed more than 12 million times across platforms. Comment sections filled with thousands of stories from women who said they recognized themselves in Linda. Women who had smiled through the jokes. Women who had absorbed the small cuts for years. Women who watched Steve Harvey defend a stranger's dignity and felt, for a moment, defended themselves. "I showed this to my husband and didn't say a word," one comment read with 47,000 likes. "He understood." "My mother sent me this video," wrote another woman. "She said, this is why I finally spoke up." Major publications picked up the story. Morning talk shows discussed it. Steve Harvey addressed it briefly on his social media, writing simply, "Every woman who takes care of everything deserves someone who says so out loud. That's all I did." What changed at home 3 months after the episode aired? Melissa agreed to speak with a journalist from a regional Ohio publication who had reached out after the story spread locally. She was careful with what she shared, protective of her parents' privacy. But she said this, "My dad watched that episode. He watched himself. And I really think, it was the first time he understood how it looked from the outside, how it felt from the inside. He's not a different person, but he's a more thoughtful one. He asked my mom to go to dinner last month, just the two of them, and he told her he was proud of her. She called me afterward, crying, good tears." Linda herself gave a brief comment through Melissa when the story was picked up nationally. She asked that her full name not be used in most coverage, and that request was honored by most outlets. But she said one thing that spread as widely as Steve's speech. "I didn't go on that show to have a moment. I went because my daughter wanted me to have fun, but something happened there that I didn't expect. Somebody saw me, really saw me, and I remembered what that felt like." The bigger conversation, what Steve Harvey did that day, was not complicated. He didn't deliver a lecture. He didn't shame Gary publicly beyond what the moment required. He simply refused to let an unkind comment disappear into the noise of a television taping. He paused. He asked questions. He reflected back the truth that was already visible to everyone in the room, that Linda Pierce was a woman worthy of respect, and he made sure she heard it clearly. In an era when people talk constantly about big, systemic change, sometimes the most powerful thing is a small, deliberate act of recognition. A man with a microphone choosing to use it well. Steve Harvey has hosted Family Feud for years. He has seen thousands of families walk across that stage. He has witnessed joy and grief and silliness and genuine human drama. But the moments people remember, the clips that travel, are never the big prize wins. They're the moments when something real happens between people, when a truth gets spoken out loud that needed to be spoken. This was one of those moments. And Linda Pierce, school librarian from Columbus, Ohio, who woke up at 5 in the morning and packed the lunches and paid the bills and smiled through the jokes for 27 years, she got to stand at a podium under bright lights while a studio full of strangers stood up for her. It wasn't everything. One moment doesn't fix 27 years, but it was something. It was a woman being seen, fully, out loud, and sometimes that's exactly where change begins. If this story moved you the way it moved me, share it with someone who needs to hear it. And if you haven't already, subscribe to this channel and hit that notification bell. Every week we bring you stories like this one, stories about real moments, real people, and what happens when someone chooses kindness over everything else. We'll see you in the next one.